This is part 3 of the Tabby Cat Reclining in watercolour. I've made up this dark mix of ultramarine, ochre and crimson, mostly ultramarine, and I want it to be very dry in the palette so that when you draw onto wet with this it spreads, but it doesn't spread too much. So this is the colour, and you can see how dry that is. If I tilt the palette, it doesn't run anywhere. So there's a lot of gum arabic in this mix, not much water, hardly any water. The surface of the watercolour can be redamped very gently, better done with a natural fibre brush like this soft squirrel hair brush. So I've just damped that area. I'm going to have a go at putting in these dark markings, stripes onto wet. So I'm going to try and just let that work the first time, just leave it alone, just try not to brush it too many times because that can undo the freshness of the watercolour. So there is a little bit of dark in the ear, particularly on this edge, a little bit of black, but that sort of fades into grey. So I'm working with the two brushes, the wet clean brush and the brush with the colour on it, which is really quite dry. Very gently just brush over that, and it is possible to paint onto a surface that hasn't got it's just wetted, but without disturbing the colour that's already there. So that's on damp. Just trying to pick up these darker markings on the cat, and trying to give an impression of the fur with the blurring of the colour. So a little bit of marking there. Difficult here on the muzzle, I suppose you'd call it. There's a little darker dabs of colour there where the whiskers appear from. Just slightly darker on blur, on a blurry effect in amongst all that masking. There's not a lot more I can do there. There's a little bit more around the back of the head here, perhaps. Just blur that edge. Try and catch that. This is very direct painting, very much spontaneous painting, leaving the colour to disperse. So it's a little bit softer there, which I'd like to try and leave. So just wetting local areas. I'm working from left to right as I'm right-handed. That's a very gentle brush, this squirrel. So there's a stripe on grey. There's another one. Just looking at how dark that is underneath the chin there. And this little area here helps to contrast the chin, which is just has a sort of furry textured edge. So limited wetting. That's where I'd masked the whiskers earlier. Just a little bit of water on there and leave it to disperse. A bit of impression of stripe. Just leave that to disperse. So the depth of field, or the area that's in focus on this animal, is really right here, and the rest of the body is less sharply in focus. So that would be looser watercolour, little dabs of paint, trying to keep the brush moving rather than repeating over the same area. And what helps colour areas to go back into space is less contrast. so less contrast further away means slightly paler colours perhaps for the rest of this body. See if I can make that happen. So it's another blurry area. So I'm going to get this leg. Being already painted stops the colour from the water from soaking in as much. So the paper doesn't stay wet for as long as it might otherwise do. See if I can. So the stripe sort of gradually diminishes on the leg. Actually goes out of focus. The stripes, of course, are going round the shape of the leg, so that's important. The stripe has a curved or slightly cylindrical aspect down to the toes here, the paw, and that stripe is sort of going round there, and then the individual toes, are they? I don't know if cats have toes, and claw, a little bit of claw. It's all a bit darker there. Let's try that. So whatever happens there, and it is a little bit out of control, I'm going to leave that alone and just let it disperse. Hopefully the timing of and the wetting work together. I can get this darker stripe here. Yeah. So let's keep moving the brush so that the brush doesn't linger too long in one spot. What I'm hoping will happen too is this ultramarine ochre and crimson mixture is going to separate a bit, and the particles will you sort of get this flare of the lighter colour pigment particle, the crimson and the ochre separate a bit from the ultramarine. That's about right. Let's try and get this stripe. Yeah. So there is a claw in there somewhere which I've drawn, which can maybe bring that out later with by lifting out. So this is all quite dark on the pads and the feet here. You know that watercolour dries lighter. That's all furry too, furry edges everywhere on this thing. Yeah, so that's the area that's more sharply in focus, and then the rest of it is, I think, just a little bit out of focus. That means possibly slightly wetter, slightly paler. Let's try and get that to merge a little bit. So paler means water in the palette but not water on the brush in this case, because that would tend to spread too far. Colour would spread too far. So that's, I need to lose that edge a little bit there. So little tufts of slightly darker fur or deeper coloured fur. The back, example. The paper is drying so fast. That's gone a little bit out of control there, but then that's what watercolour does. So can do. Let's try and keep this. So the belly, the body, that's a cylinder too, that's a rounded shape. We'll try and keep that in mind as these marks curve. I'm guided by the remnants of the drawing with this, so I've got a little bit there. But not too much brushing around, obviously, because that would tend to lift what's there already. So a little bit of darker colour there. And then this fold in here, which trying to make this the angle of the back coming in with these stripes, which act very much like contours. I just wet this. So I'm not reworking, that's very important, not to go back onto the previously painted area. Little bits of stripy effect. Not sure what about the background yet, don't know, I might do something with that. And this complex array of stripes going around the shape. The leg. The back leg. And the paws there. The tail, which is really out of focus. The tail is has a dark tip to it. I should go round that shape a little bit and then disperse, go round this shape. Just lose that edge there. Just blur that, blur it away. So this leg, there's not a lot of darker fur in the tummy. Something there going around that shape. A little bit there. That's quite dark there. And just following the drawing, hopefully losing the drawing as well. So that's just background happening there. Well, maybe sometimes leave those. That can be sorted out later. Best left alone for the moment. And then the pads on the feet quite dark, going up into the gaps between the feet. So that's the first impression of the stripes. Leave it alone, don't do any more. Better to leave it alone. That can be resolved a bit later. So I'm hoping to come back in part 4 and complete the detail and maybe think about a background.